and welcome to the Learner Centered Collaborative podcast. I am here today with César Morales, a wonderful member of our team. Today, we are going to dive into a conversation about frameworks for the future and talk about what they are, why they're so important and integral to this work, and a few partners that are on their journey and some examples for you all. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce you to César. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Kelsey. Happy to be here.
Before we get started, I'd love for our audience to learn a little bit about who you are, what your background is, and how you came to this work. So would you mind just telling us a little bit about your journey and how you came to Learner Centered Collaborative?
Absolutely. So I would say my journey has always consisted of the desire to shape and form high-performing teams. So whether high school principal, middle school principal, central office school leader, or my roles as an athletic football and baseball coach, that design of chemistry and clarity of what we stand for and how we measure success has always been something that just really fuels me as a person. And so with that framework for the future completely jives with some of the integral pieces that high-performing teams possess, and then have always aligned and complemented the work that I get to do with others.
Yeah, so with the work that you've done thus far, what is your role now? What do you do at LCC?
So I get to work alongside partners, and that would be school districts, schools, to design learning experiences for faculty, school leaders, and I would say to design high-performing teams. So I'm in a sweet role in that I get to work with and learn from extraordinary school leaders, and then have equally extraordinary colleagues here at Learner Centered.
And remind me, where were you working before LCC? What was some of the work that you were doing that informed the work you do now?
So the most recent experience, a professional experience, was being a leader of an HR department for a school district, about 4,500 students. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, I was in Central America leading an international school. And then prior to that, I was in Southern California leading a high school, opened up a high school, and then also a middle school principal.
Wow, special. Well, we're so glad to have you here today to talk about this work. I like to ask everyone to start with a little bit of their why. And my question to you, César, is why learner-centered? Why is it so important to you and important to the field of education?
So I would say, I think I would apply this to the framework for the future, when we as individuals, and then when we collectively as an organization have clarity on three simple questions: who am I, where am I going, and how will I get there? Magic happens. And I would say me connecting with Learner Centered, the ethos of Learner Centered had such a strong connection to me and how I aspire to lead organizations. And so just the ethos of LCC with my own personal internal wiring, if you will, there was such strong alignment. And that alignment is always starting with focusing on our learners, and in my leadership capacities, focusing on those I serve, and focus on the assets that folks bring to the table and leverage those around a collective understanding and clarity of who we are, what we stand for, where we're going, and unleash talent. I think that's, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. All right, let's dive in. A framework for the future. I know for me, this was something that I needed to define for myself. I didn't really understand the difference between some of the work that was already happening in the field and this phrase of a framework for the future. So would you give me your definition of a framework for the future?
Right. So a framework for the future, what it is in designing it and building it, you're building a collective understanding of who you are, right? So you've got your mission, your vision, your core values, your operating principles, right? What can you expect of one another? And then you are then defining student success. In particular, in Framework for the Future, you're defining whole learner outcomes and coupling a learning model that's going to yield those whole learner outcomes. So it's a collective design and co-constructed framework that identifies success for the organization. And it also shapes the learning experiences that students will have in order to yield those whole learner outcomes. So
yeah. And I know you've told me this before, but I think it's really important. I also hear things like portrait of a graduate. Sometimes I hear graduate or learner profile. And you've told me, this is the piece of the puzzle. But would you expand on that a little bit, how you see these two things as different, but also things that work together?
mhm. I would say that whether you name it a graduate profile, portrait of a graduate, learner profile, whatever vernacular you use, it is a piece of the puzzle. And what I have seen is that there are some organizations that get there, but I would venture to say it's not enough, right? You're defining the whole learner outcomes, you're defining student success. But where the work is, I think some of the more challenging work is then coming to a commitment of the learning experiences or the learning model that the organization is going to adopt in order to ensure those outcomes are what the focus is, and that they actually influence pedagogy. And so that's where the learning model comes in. And then once you name that, you're building capacity and you're scaling out the understanding, and then the change of practices that'll get you to that learner profile.
And what I'm hearing from you, it's also cyclical. You're continuing to reflect on, does our model, our pedagogy, our learning experiences match what we say we want our learners to achieve and become and be in the world? And does that match our vision, mission, core values? And it's just continuing to reflect on that and build on that. Is that correct?
I would say so. In a way that I've started to think about it is that a framework for the future is it's like a connective tissue of all of these different elements. What is the learning that should be taking place? How do we define success for our learners? What do we stand for? And so all of these things are intersecting simultaneously and cyclically.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'd love to hear about some of the examples that you have that are happening in the field, because if you're anything like me, I like something tangible of like, this school district is doing it, this is what they're doing, this is why it's working, and here's what you could try. So something I would love for you to touch on, if you have these examples, is I think what we haven't touched on yet is input first. Before you're making these decisions, who are you getting input from and why is that important? So 2 questions here. I guess it's, can you think of an example you'd like to share? And hopefully that example can also start with input.
Absolutely. So we have several partners. I'll name, for example, we have Laguna Beach, a pre-K-12 organization, Southern California, about 2,500 students. And then we have Escondido Union, pre-K 8 with about 14,000 students. And so you have a different geographical and different communities, if you will, different students that are being served. But the commonality is that both in starting this process or co-construction of a framework for the future, because it needs to be co-constructed. You need to have educators, school leaders, central office, parents, even Laguna Beach had students in this co-construction process. Is that the very first step that we start with is listening to learners. And so we do that by hosting student forums and really ask 3 simple open-ended questions. Students, for you, what is working that you want the leaders and educators to keep in place because they get you excited about going to school? You feel like it's preparing you for post high school aspirations. What are some things that you feel aren't as effective and maybe should stop? And then third, what are some things that you're not experiencing that you feel need to be part of your day-to-day experience in this school system? And so both of our partners started there. And through that input, then you begin to design and iterate on what might be our whole learner outcomes that we feel our students need to be successful during and after their experience in our school system.
Yeah. So what's happening at these schools? Where are they at now, and how's it going?
It's going great. Laguna Beach, we've named our the whole learner outcomes, and I think you heard me say our whole learner outcomes, but it's really because as a partner, we become very invested with our partners, and so with Laguna Beach, now where we're at is defining the learning model, and again, they've done a great job of just an accordion effect, if you will, where there's brainstorming, then it goes out to the school site, then we bring it back in for iteration and elevation. But they've really done a good job of incorporating the community voice. With Escondido, we're just getting started. We'll start to work through naming the whole learner outcomes. And Escondido's done a great job of putting together what they call a design team. And so we have about between 55 to 65 community members that range from classified staff, certificated staff, parents, central office leaders, site leaders, and collectively co-constructing how we define success in Escondido.
Thank you for sharing. And I think sometimes when I look at this work of framework for the future, it can feel really large, and it can feel hard to bite off a piece. Mm-hmm. And so when you're partnering with a district or an organization, how are you, what's my question? What's the first bite you say, hey, let's take this bite size off of this large or massive initiative? What can make it feel possible?
Mm-hmm. Well, from a tactical perspective is we first start meeting with our partners to define what does success look like for this process, right? Because each partner is seeking something a little bit different, even though we're collectively trying to frame out a framework for the future. So we start there, because then that drives our approach and the learning experiences we design for our partners. But as we mentioned before, the very first step is listening to learners, because I can't tell you how many ahas come out of that and how much momentum gets generated from just listening to learners. And then when we bring that information forward, analyze it with the adults, there's some initial ideation that happens that some of the adults didn't even think was possible, or some ideas that didn't even know existed. And even sometimes some ideas float up that it's like, wow, that's an easy thing to take care of. Let's just start building momentum with that. So listening to learners is always a great stop, but it's also a momentum generator.
Yeah. Well, the passion for this work is oozing off of you. I mean, I know you personally, and I know you love this work, but I guess my closing question for you is what makes you so passionate about this? Why is this the thing that you're so fired up about?
Yeah, I'm glad you're picking up on that, because it really is something that I can really, I enjoy working alongside folks on getting clarity for the organization, because I've seen the impact that it makes, right? It'll drive and influence how you use time, energy, resources. It'll bring clarity to the work. It'll bring clarity to identity. And it will lead to high performing teams. And I've seen it in action, whether it's opening up a high school or turning around a school. When you start with clarity, it's the amount of creativity that comes out of that, the amount of innovation that comes out of it is exponential. And so it fires me up, and I enjoy doing the work alongside our partners.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. Is there anything else that's on your mind? Anything you want to share? Anything you're excited about to do this spring that you'd want to share with us? Or
I'm just excited about the work I get to do alongside our partners, both those that we are starting with, and those that we are not only closing out the framework for the future, but we're expanding the work of how we scale out the impact that framework for the future will have on student learning.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to connect with you and chat about this work. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for your examples. Most importantly, thank you for your passion and for sharing it with all of us. always love to talk to you. So thank you so much, César.
Thank you, Kelsey. Appreciate it.